Hi everyone, welcome back to the Veg Fest Wildlife Summit 2020, co-hosted by Animal Aid and Humane Wildlife Solutions. I'm just introducing Natalia Doran, who runs London-based Rescue Urban Squirrels. Natalia does incredible work with squirrels, both hands-on rescuing orphaned and injured squirrels and also advocating for these really misunderstood animals and campaigning to try and stop some of the awful mistreatment that they are subjected to, such as culling and really unfair laws. And she's faced a lot of difficulties to her work, especially this year with the licenses to release them back into the wild having been revoked. But yeah, she's going to be talking to us today about some of the myths and the facts about grey squirrels and the in-between, of course. So yes, very excited. And Natalia's a really wonderful person, does some incredible work, and I'm sure everyone's going to find this very interesting and enlightening, and it's going to be a great resource. Hi, Natalia.
Jade, for your very kind introduction. Dear friends, consider, if you will, two activities. Activity number one, you trap a wild animal, transfer her to a bag, and hit her on the head with a heavy object to kill her. Activity number two, you rescue a wild animal, an orphaned baby or an injured adult, treat them, hand-rear them, return them back to the wild where they came from. Now, one of these activities is perfectly legal and supported by public funds. The other is a wildlife crime. And my question to you today is, which is which? As Jade said, I run a wildlife rescue unit here in London called Urban Squirrels, and we specialize in grey squirrels, rescue advice and advocacy. And that, of course, is the clue to the answer to my original question. Unfortunately, if it is a grey squirrel, then it is perfectly legal in this country to trap and kill her, even if she is a lactating mother and her babies would thereby starve to death. It is an activity that is supported, and very generously so, by public funds and encouraged by many large environmental organizations. However, if you rescue a grey squirrel, an injured adult or an orphan baby, hand-rear them and try to put them back where you took them from, you are, as of last year, a wildlife criminal. It's a wildlife crime punishable by a fine and or up to 2 years in prison. So welcome to the presentation entitled Grey Squirrels, Myth, Fact, and In Between, the alternative title being Confessions of a Wildlife Criminal. Now, would-be wildlife criminal. There is a saying in the Russian language, my native language, in case you're wondering, never say you will never beg and never say you will never go to prison. When I was young, I used to think, well, yes, your financial circumstances can change and you can become so poor you're effectively a beggar. But surely you can't say that you will never go to prison because you're not going to do anything wrong. Well, now that I'm older, I know that it is possible to go to prison for doing something right. So why do we have this anomaly? Why do we have these cute little animals, grey squirrels, very intelligent, very charming, who I hated to such an extent that not only are they themselves persecuted, but even people who help them are regarded as criminals? In order to put the discussion into context, I'm going to, or rather the editor is going to play some videos of our rescue, just cute videos. I'm not going to show you anything nasty, just some videos of our rescue. Urban Squirrels was started 6 years ago by myself and my son Johnny, who is a young adult with autism. Johnny is very strong, very capable, very intelligent, but he is also severely handicapped. So it is impossible for him really to work outside the home, even in a voluntary capacity. But he wanted to work with animals. I like animals, the understatement of the century. So we decided to run our rescue from our home. We decided to specialize in grey squirrels quite early on because that is where the need was the greatest. I mean, it still is even more so. The thing is, grey squirrels in London and cities in general, they occupy a kind of interesting halfway house position between, pets, companion animals, and wild animals, free-living animals. For some Londoners, such as, well, Generation Rent, young professionals or the disabled or the elderly, people who cannot take on the responsibility of a live-in companion animal, can nonetheless form a friendship with a free-living squirrel in their garden or in the park, and it's beneficial to both parties, really. The person gets the companionship, the squirrel gets the food, and also veterinary care. The one, I think, undiluted good that we can offer to other animals. And when something goes wrong with these animals or with their young, people expect there to be a rescue pathway where you can take your dog or cat or rabbit to the vet. Why not for the squirrel? And this is what we were privileged to provide. We would take in mainly orphaned babies, sometimes injured adults as well, treat them, hand rear them, and return them back where they came from. We also realized quite early on that because gray squirrels are not native to this country, they were introduced from America 150 years ago, you need a license to keep and release them. So we applied for and duly obtained those licenses. Several associates joined in the work. I don't like the word volunteer because it kind of has this connotation of unpaid employee, and anybody, as it happens, anybody and everybody who works under the Urban Squirrels umbrella is very much boss material. We also realized quite early on that just as we're keen to help gray squirrels, other people are keen to kill them. So the advocacy side of the work was born and continues to be an integral part of what we do. And then in just before Christmas 2018, disaster struck. All the rescue organizations in the country that deal with the so-called invasive alien species, such as muntjac deer or gray squirrels, got an email from Natural England, the licensing body, telling us that new legislation was coming in, Invasive Alien Species Order 2019. And all our licenses were thereby revoked. Any squirrels found on our premises beyond a certain date would have to be killed. Needless to say, we went into action, as did many other organizations. Urban Squirrels ran a parliamentary petition that was signed by 60,000 people. The government responded. There was a public consultation. There were questions asked and answered in Parliament. The issue was covered by a national press. The large organizations spoke out against this draconian legislation. Well, I was about to say, but all to no avail. No, we did win a very important concession in as much as we're still now allowed to keep gray squirrels. But we're not allowed to release them, which really, I mean, you cannot run a rescue like that because the residential places become very full very quickly. I mean, we extended our facilities threefold, completely depleting our financial resources in the process. But now we're full, and when spring comes, really, we may have to turn animals away, which is a horrible position for a rescue to be in. So the campaign very much continues. So what I would like to do today is try to analyze the atmosphere, the intellectual, social, ethical atmosphere in which this kind of extreme persecution becomes possible. In order to do so, I will present you with 7 gray squirrel myths. 7 is a nice mythological number, some directly to do with gray squirrels, some more general to do with our relationship with other animals. So each myth, each segment, I will start by stating the myth, then try to analyze the fact and fiction in it. A myth is not the same as a lie. There are elements of truth in it, and then try to show how the myth appears in real life, in mainstream media, on social media, in dinner table conversation. And myth number 1, to which pride of place probably belongs, is the mantra native good, alien bad. In order to be considered native as an animal in this country, you have to have been here since the formation of the English Channel 8,000 years ago. If you had to cross the channel to get here, sorry, you don't belong. Well, not quite as bad as that. If you were here in the 12th century or before, rabbits, for example, were brought in by the Romans, then you are naturalized, and that's okay too. But if you are brought after the 12th century, then you're an alien, you do not belong. This attitude has not actually always been there. In the 19th century, the academic and conservation fashion was the opposite. It was fashionable to collect animals and plants from all over what was then the British Empire and to try to establish them on different continents. It was cutting-edge science, and it was called acclimatization, and it was in that context that grey squirrels were brought into this country from America. Unfortunately for them, the pendulum of fashion has since swung in the opposite direction, and now introduced species are public enemy number one as far as traditional conservation is concerned, regardless of their actual ecological impact. Now, as far as the truth and fiction in that myth is concerned, it is certainly true that it's not a good idea to pull animals from their homes and dump them on different continents. But that is not the same as persecuting animals that are already here, that have been here for a long time, that are well established in the ecosystem and are in fact a good ecological fit. The irrationality of this mantra, native good, alien bad, stems from the fact that it's predicated on a certain idea of nature, as if nature was something static, something that doesn't change. And conservation seeks to quite literally conserve, freeze frame nature in its given state, for some reason believed to be the optimum one. But this puts the human on a collision course with nature itself, because nature does not stand still, it changes all the time. And a species that did well in a habitat 300 or 400 years ago, such as the red squirrel, which is native as a species to this country. They did well, say, 300 or 400 years ago, at some point since then as well, but they're not necessarily going to do well in the new changed habitat. Whereas an introduced species can become a good, though accidental, ecological fit. So that is the element of mythology, if you like. Why should the history of dispersal, rather than present-day ecological fitness, become the criterion of who belongs and who doesn't? The way the myth plays itself out in real life can be quite incidental, quite casual. You might read the description of a beauty spot that would say that it's home to many species of native plants and native animals, which kind of begs the question of what is so automatically, inherently good about being native that it becomes the selling point of a beauty spot. But the mantra, the native good, alien bad mantra, can take a far more sinister turn when it becomes the basis of policy making. And as animal campaigners, as Jade would know, we hear from politicians, from DEFRA, the Department for the Environment here in this country, again and again, we have to kill grey squirrels in order to protect our native red squirrels. Now, even if it were true that killing grey squirrels helps red ones, and I will deal with this subject in a minute, it leaves open the ethical question of why it should be right to start killing one type of animal in their millions in order to help another type of animal, simply because you prefer them as our native. There has actually been a small positive development in this. If we, well, as animal rights people, if we want to enter this particular discourse, one way of doing it is to point out the hypocrisy that exists with the shooting industry. Because shooting estates are allowed to release millions of non-native game birds into the British countryside every year. No one seems to bat an eyelid. But Chris Packham's organization, Wild Justice, managed to obtain a commitment from Natural England, the licensing body, to now require licenses from at least some shooting estates before they release those poor birds. It's a small step, but it is a positive step in a situation where there isn't much positive that is positive going on, frankly. Myth number two is the myth of the red squirrel, or rather the mythological narrative that goes like this. Once upon a time, there were lots of red squirrels, and then grey squirrels came and fought them, killed them, pushed them out. Now here, really, grey squirrels have a watertight alibi, because red squirrels became virtually extinct in this country before grey squirrels were introduced. It happened at the end of the 18th century. And it happened because of habitat loss, because of deforestation, due to human activity, particularly in the Industrial Revolution. The thing is, red squirrels need a very specific habitat in order to thrive. They're not as adaptable as their grey cousins. Red squirrels need extensive forests, ideally pine or equivalent in wildlife corridors. And when this habitat was no longer available to them, their numbers crashed. So in terms of myth and fact, here we have to be quite careful, because if we simply say that red squirrels as a species are native to this country, it is true. If we say that in the majority of British habitats, particularly in England and Scotland, the situation is somewhat different, grey squirrels outcompete red squirrels, it is once again true. What is not true is this narrative of red squirrels thriving in their natural habitat and then the grey squirrels coming and pushing them out. The habitat destruction came first, and then the new changed habitat does in many cases favor the grey squirrel. Actually, as far as the nativeness of red squirrels is concerned, it needs to be noted as well that after, as I said, their numbers crashed, they were themselves reintroduced from Scandinavia. By the way, I do have references for all I'm saying. Because of the technology of being a guest here, I cannot put banners on the screen, but we do have a reference section on our website, www.urbansquirrels.co.uk. I mean, the case I'm making today is ethical, but in as much as I make factual claims, I can substantiate them from published peer-reviewed scientific papers, references, as I said, on our website. So red squirrels were themselves reintroduced from Scandinavia, and in terms of their lineage, they're not exactly native either. Oh, thank you. So the way the myth can appear in real life can be, well, straightforwardly misleading, if you pardon the oxymoron. Basically, sometimes killing grey squirrels is presented as a way of saving another species, namely red squirrels, from extinction. Red squirrels are not, though, threatened with extinction. They are a successful species in their own right. They're very, very numerous, really, on a large territory from Scandinavia to Turkey to Siberia. Wherever the habitat is correct for them, they thrive. Unfortunately, this is no longer the case in this country. So in this country, they are endangered, but globally, their conservation status is least concern. So saying that grey squirrels have to be killed to save another species from extinction is a lie. Red squirrels are not threatened with extinction. Another way in which the red squirrel myth appears in newspapers, for example, mainly local ones, is that a story is published again and again and again. Red squirrel conservation groups, the ones that actually kill grey squirrels, seem to be not only very well funded, but also rather well connected, and they manage to successfully pitch their stories to local papers. Okay, I'm envious. I'm an animal rights advocate. I do try to pitch stories. Some of them get published, most don't. But red squirrel conservation groups seem to be able to get the story published again and again that goes something like this: we killed lots of grey squirrels and now red squirrels are thriving. But if you examine these projects just a tiny bit closer, you'll see that the red squirrels in question are artificially maintained, with extensive captive breeding programs. That's a way for farmers to diversify. They breed red squirrels for money, with release cages, nest boxes, feeding stations. These feeding stations are problematic for the red squirrels themselves, because red squirrels did not evolve to live in close proximity with each other, to be so close together. But if they are released in a habitat where it's not quite suitable for them and where they cannot find food naturally, they have to rely on the feeding stations, come very close together, can't socially distance, and they catch diseases of each other, which are then blamed on grey squirrels, but more on that in a minute. Also, those feeding stations are problematic because of the food that is placed in them. It is softer than red squirrels' natural diet. And over a few generations, their jaws became weaker. So even if suddenly, the habitat was miraculously enhanced to such an extent that there is natural food available, they would not be able to eat it because their jaws are simply too weak. So those projects that kill grey squirrels in order to help red squirrels, I mean, they're clearly very cruel to grey squirrels. They constantly have to kill them because grey squirrels do migrate. They're also not particularly nice to the red squirrels themselves. But above all, they do not prove what they set out to prove, that if you kill grey squirrels, red squirrels would flourish, because the red squirrels in question are artificially maintained. So myth number 3, is the myth of the squirrelpox. It's closely connected with the previous one. Basically, that grey squirrels are killing off red squirrels with the pox virus. I seem to encounter this particular myth a lot on social media. I might put up, like one of those pictures, a picture of a cute grey squirrel feeding, and then somebody somewhere will eventually comment, oh, but this is a grey squirrel and they're large and aggressive and they're killing our native reds. Well, I might kind of point out that grey squirrels are not carnivorous. Then my opponent would grow quiet for a minute, clearly Googling for information, and then come back triumphantly and say, grey squirrels are killing red squirrels with the squirrelpox virus. And this is, it kind of strikes a chord with people. We're all about viruses these days, aren't we? But it is one of those cases where knowledge is a good thing, lack of knowledge is a bad thing, but the worst thing is a little bit of knowledge. In terms of the facts, yes, of course, it is true that there is such a disease as squirrelpox, and grey squirrels are immune to it, and they can pass it to red squirrels, to whom it is usually fatal, not invariably so. 10% of red squirrels do survive, develop immunity, and some studies suggest they even pass the immunity on to their offspring. But this is where the facts kind of end, because then the mythology takes over and goes in two directions. One direction simply exaggerates the statistical significance of the squirrelpox virus. It can be presented as the main or even the only cause of red squirrel mortality. Well, in fact, red squirrels unfortunately die from a number of diseases, nothing to do with grey squirrels, as well as from anthropogenic causes. They die on the road, they drown, etc. And another direction is has to do with the process of disease transmission. Because red squirrels are far more likely to catch the disease from fellow reds rather than from grey squirrels. Again, there are studies that have shown that, referenced on our website, www.urbansquirrels.co.uk. In the menu, in the campaign section, there'll be references to the studies that show that. The way the myth of the squirrelpox appears in real life, in newspapers, can be it can be kind of misleading, highly misleading, really, when it suggests that the pox is the main or even the only cause of red squirrel mortality. It can also take a kind of hypothetical form. We might read something like, if the squirrelpox gets into a red squirrel population, it can wipe it out. And it's the ifs and the cans, the hypothetical structure of that argument, that is what makes it misleading. If the disease spreads, but first of all, it doesn't always spread, and also it wouldn't spread if those red squirrels were not maintained artificially with shared feeders. Another way in which newspapers can inadvertently, I suppose, spread myths is when they quote past studies. The methodology of those studies has since been discarded by scientists, but for some reason, red squirrel conservation groups and usually local newspapers to which they feed the stories have not caught on. In the past, squirrelpox studies relied on what is known as citizen science. Basically, people would volunteer to monitor red squirrel populations, and if they saw a poor red squirrel with skin lesions or a carcass with lesions, they would report that as a squirrelpox case. It would be recorded in the study as a squirrelpox case and find its way as such into computer models predicting population trends. But the problem is there are red squirrels succumb to a number of diseases with the same outward symptoms as the pox. And the only way to diagnose this disease definitively is in the laboratory. More recent studies do rely on laboratory tests in their studies of the pox, but for some reason, newspapers can continue to quote past studies, and it's simply a case of the science of yesterday becoming the mythology of today. Myth number 4, I think we are 4, isn't it, is the tree myth. Basically, that grey squirrels destroy trees and cause deforestation. This myth does appear fairly counterintuitive because grey squirrels are known as some of nature's greatest conservationists. They regenerate forests by well, they cache seeds and nuts, and when they bury seeds and nuts, they plant new trees. This myth has, well, I mean, it does have a factual basis in as much as squirrels, gray and red ones, do feed on trees. They can eat, well, they do eat the twigs and leaves and buds, and they can strip the bark in order to get to the jelly underneath. But the point is, this changes the physical appearance of the tree. It doesn't kill the tree, or at least in the absolute majority of cases. In a few cases, the bark stripping can allow disease to get in, then the tree does die, and it becomes a very valuable wildlife habitat in its own right. Dead wood is important for the habitat. Even in commercial forestry, which is of course not a natural way for trees to grow, but even there, this accusation against gray squirrels does not stand. The Forestry Commission conducted its own research into gray squirrel damage and found it to be just 5%, which is acceptable. Statistically, the threshold for destruction is 30%. The way the myth plays out in real life is perhaps the most mysterious and disturbing. Even national papers can carry quotes from Forestry Commission officials who say that we have to kill gray squirrels, otherwise we can't successfully plant new trees. You can't do reforestation unless you kill gray squirrels. And that comes from Forestry Commission officials, but then so does the research. I mean, Forestry Commission's own research seems to absolve gray squirrels of that blame. I have no explanation for this particular media phenomenon. Maybe we all simply underestimate the incompetence factor. I don't know. Another source of the tree myth is the timber industry. From there, we might hear that gray squirrels cost the economy, and then some kind of fantastical number is quoted. What we need to do is look at a breakdown of these costs, because we immediately see that they include the cost of killing gray squirrels. So let's not kill squirrels and save some money. It also includes some very creative accounting. Because cosmetic damage to timber that has cosmetic damage from gray squirrel activity is counted as if it's left out of production together, which of course it isn't, because if it's construction timber, then what difference does cosmetic damage make? And even when we buy our wooden products, or wooden floors or wooden furniture, and we see a kind of discoloration or knots in the wood, but that is sold to us as part of the natural charm of the wood, and we buy it as such. But the price is counted as if it was lost to gray squirrel damage. Myth number 5 is the bird myth. I'm going to speed up now a bit. Basically, that gray squirrels are reducing the population of our native birds. This myth, I mean, it's quick to deal with simply because an extensive government-funded monitoring program has concluded that gray squirrel presence does not affect bird numbers. Overall, it does not reduce the population of birds. And yet the myth, well, persists, partly because, of course, there is an element of truth in it, in as much as squirrels, well, red and gray, I think reds are actually a bit more carnivorous, but they are opportunistic feeders. And if they came across an unattended nest, they can take an egg, they can take a chick. The point is that this activity, they're not carnivores, and this activity does not cause the bird population to decline. This myth does not appear in newspapers very often, except perhaps as a quote from somebody who, well, clearly likes killing and uses that as an excuse. I'm protecting birds. On social media, it's a lot more widespread. Well, once again, people who clearly like killing say, oh, I do it because I like birds, or something like that. And I mean, of course, we can quote the study to them. I mean, it is an authoritative, definitive study on the subject. But well, I mean, people who like killing are not inclined to listen to studies, are they? They circulate pictures on social media showing gray squirrels eating birds. At least one of these pictures is a fake. It was originally actually a gray squirrel holding her own baby, and it was photoshopped to make it look as if she was eating a small bird. Which, I mean, it doesn't really matter. I mean, we know that animals eat each other, and it must be a horrible, horrible thing to witness. But the point here is gray squirrel activity does not result in the reduction of bird numbers, and to suggest otherwise is a myth. Myth number 6, sorry, I keep counting. Myth number 6 is, well, it can be formulated perhaps as follows. It's a more general one. If you're serious about conservation, you have to be prepared to kill animals. We have to manage the ecosystem, and that's why we have to kill animals. Now, in fact, it's seen as a kind of sign of intellectual maturity, being ready to kill animals. This myth is unfortunately very widely spread. I mean, even the otherwise completely wonderful Chris Packham seems to succumb to it. This myth, however, is ethically illiterate, not to put too fine a point on it. It is ethically illiterate because it does not make a very important distinction between, on the one hand, scientific facts, which we cannot change, and on the other hand, the way we act on those scientific facts, our actions in putting those scientific facts into practice. So science, for example, can tell us that in certain habitats, gray squirrels outcompete red ones. And fine, that's a scientific fact. But then we can either say, right, now we're going to kill gray squirrels, the more successful species, in the millions, and artificially maintain the less successful species. Or we can say that we'll let nature take its course, that it's a matter of the survival of the fittest, and the habitat will choose the animal. And whichever paradigm we go for, the scientific facts will be the same. It will be an ethical choice for us. And in this ethical choice making, mostly animal rights and conservation do part company. The issue over which they part company is the priority of the individual versus the species or the ecosystem. So for traditional conservationists, the priority would be the ecosystem, and they see nothing wrong with killing individual animals if they think it will protect the ecosystem or the species. Whereas animal rights people would place value on the life of the individual animal. As far as I'm concerned, predictably, I suppose, the position of animal rights here is the one that is logically sound. The reason animals are accorded moral consideration at all, the reason we can even talk about what is right and what is wrong in relation to animals, is the fact that animals are sentient. They feel things, they feel fear, pain, joy, pleasure, they want to live, etc. But those characteristics of sentience are predicated of the individual animal, not the ecosystem or the species. It is the individual animal that feels the fear or the pain, not the species. So in that sense, the ecosystem is secondary. It is a place for individuals to flourish, but it's a means to an end. It cannot have ethical priority for that reason. So, well, that's why I believe it is a myth to say that in order to be serious about conservation, you have to kill animals. I believe it's a question of conservation paradigm, and it can be challenged. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do, to challenge a well-ingrained conservation paradigm, but I think it is worth doing because conservation does not logically entail the killing of animals. In fact, quite the opposite. And the last myth, myth number 7, which I will present by way of conclusion, is that we have to manage nature. We have to manage the ecosystem with our custodians of the countryside, etc. Not sure how nature managed before Homo sapiens came on the scene, but here we go. We need to manage nature. This idea is reminiscent of the pernicious old concept of the white man's burden. In the past, colonial powers seem to think that other nations cannot govern themselves and need colonial powers to do it for them. And now this arrogant attitude seems to have been transferred onto nature. Now we need to manage nature. But really, our own ecological impact is so devastating that we should have our hands full managing that, managing ourselves, managing our consumption, rather than trying to police the environmental impact of other species, invasive or otherwise. So the latest State of Nature report in this country identifies 2 main problems for wildlife, and these are intensive farming and climate change. So surely we should prioritize those rather than persecuting the humble gray squirrel or people who look after them. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm looking at the comments section. I don't know. Well, Jay, do you want to ask questions or moderate the questions? I'm not sure. How do you want to do the rest of the session?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if anyone has any questions that they'd like us to answer, please do post them in the comments on whichever platform you're currently watching. That was really, really fascinating and really interesting to hear it from a slightly more philosophical and ethical point of view. Just having a look to see if there are any questions that have come through so far.
Yeah, well, I'm just looking at the comments here. For example, Chris 2 is saying squirrels are vegetarian, but faced with hunger, what are they supposed to do? Which I think is a very important a place to start with. We are all animals trying to survive on this planet. Our own survival is threatened at the moment. Surely we can cut a bit of slack to other species.
Yeah, well, we have one question.
Yep.
Were you expecting the legislation change last year that made rescuing squirrels? Oh, were you expecting the legislation change last year that made rescuing grey squirrels illegal?
Well, it's as I said, the original email from Natural England we got in December 2018. The legislation was coming in the year after, so we had, I think, about a year to campaign in the end. That email came completely as a complete shock, really, because grey squirrels are so well established here. So many people like them. It was a big shock. But then we had many months. I mean, we extended the campaigning, extended the introduction of that legislation. So we had a few months.
3 times. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yes. Yes. So in the end, well, this is the first year we've had to work with it. As I said, we're full. It's a horrendous situation to be in. I mean, under the circumstances, rescue centers reacted in different ways. I mean, everybody was horrified, everybody campaigned. But once the law actually came into effect, some centers decided that they will not apply even for a keep license at all. So they've introduced an euthanasia policy for grey squirrels, which is very sad because it puts more pressure on the rest of us who did apply for a license and who are continuing to rescue grey squirrels. But some, I mean, Tiggerwinkles is a very, very big wildlife hospital. They continue to take squirrels, unfortunately only from their immediate area, otherwise they'd be overrun. Whitby Wildlife, that's again a fantastic rescue centre in the north of England. They have a very good kind of position in their community, very popular in their community. They're still rescuing squirrels. A couple of new places cropped up. Hitchin Squirrel Rescue in Hitchin, obviously, Acorn Squirrel Rescue in the West Country. So, you know, we are trying, but we are failing. If we are not allowed to release, we will fail animals, without a doubt.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have another question. What are some changes you've had to make your surrounding your process following the law change? Oh, sorry, I read that in a very kind of confusing way. What kind of changes have you had to make surrounding your process following?
Well, first of all, we had to expand our residential facilities. As I said, we expanded them threefold. Well, basically, it can even be the same aviary, but instead of say having 12 squirrels there, you can only have 4. We had to, in some of them, we've placed kind of compartments, if you like, where a squirrel group of 4 or 5 can live, and then they can timeshare the bigger space. It's actually, I mean, it's quite interesting for them, like getting new toys out for children. But there is a limit to what you can do with this. I mean, the very sad way in which we've had to change is everybody's had to do it to limit the geographical area in which they operate. And I mean, we have also, and now we all kind of know each other, and yes, we can direct each other where we need to go to some extent, to the smaller places perhaps as well, but still there isn't enough. Basically, there aren't enough rescue placements for squirrels.
Okay, yeah, we've got a couple more questions as well. We've actually had 3 come in 1 minute.
Okay.
So Sharon asks, what should members of the public do to help if they find an injured or abandoned grey squirrel?
Okay, if it is safe to do so, You can, well, first of all, I suppose it's different if it's an injured adult or a baby. Mostly you will find a baby squirrel. So if it is safe to do so, step back and wait for the mother to come back. You can wait for maybe 20 minutes or half an hour even. Very often mothers do come back for their babies. I had a wonderful case where some tree surgeons disturbed a nest. They felt very bad about it, but we said, well, just leave it and step back. And 4 babies, mum came and collected the 4 babies and carried them to another nest. I mean, squirrels are very good at planning. They usually do have a second or third home for precisely such an occasion. So do stand back and wait, but don't wait indefinitely. There are rescue centers that will tell you, oh, leave him for the mother to come back. What they mean is leave him to die. Although sometimes the mother does come back, very often she doesn't. Also, if there are dogs there or it's near a road, then obviously it's not safe to leave the baby squirrel there. In that case, pick him up, put him in a box with a hot water bottle and a blanket. Improvise a hot water bottle, like with a plastic bottle with warm water in it, an old t-shirt, an old fleece. Keep them warm. I wouldn't attempt to feed them or even give them water, because it is very easy to get the liquid into their lungs and aspirate them, basically cause pneumonia. So basically then keep the baby warm and try to find a rescue center. It is, it is not easy, but there is a directory called Help Wildlife UK. If you go to our website, Urban Squirrels website, you will see it's all kind of referenced there as well. But this directory does maintain a list of basically rescue centers that work with integrity. They don't say vermin or invasive or whatever. They, like doctors, they don't judge their patients, they help them. So yeah, Help Wildlife UK throughout the country. Call us as well. I mean, I can help you have a look, or maybe I know somebody privately as well. In the case of, injured adult, I suppose it is a slightly different case. Unfortunately, it's with babies, we have a kind of 90+% success rate, even if they come in kind of half-eaten, bitten by a cat or birds or fallen out of a nest. It's usually possible to save them. With injured adults, it's very difficult, because usually by the time you can pick them up, they're so ill. They're a prey species. If they allow you to pick them up, they're very, very ill, and cannot be saved very often. But on the other hand, it's not nice to leave them to die somewhere in stress. So with an injured adult, pick them up, but be careful. And like a baby, they can bite with their last ounce of strength. So I would do, like you evict a spider with a cup, do the same, but with a squirrel. Put a box, slide something underneath a box, turn it over, and again, call rescue center. As far as vets are concerned, they do have a duty of care towards wildlife. Most of them interpret that as killing the grey squirrels. Unfortunately, some vets are just now terrified. They think they'll be criminals if they treat the squirrel. They won't be. They're allowed to treat squirrels. They're not allowed to keep them without a license. They're not allowed to release them, but they are allowed to keep them. So with an injured adult particularly, I would nonetheless try and find a vet, because it's, obviously you don't want to leave the animal to suffer for a long time.
Okay, fantastic. We have another question from Spud. Spud says, "Hi Natalia, what's the best thing we can do to help your work?"
Oh, thank you. That is a very, very wonderful question to be asked. I mean, our main problem is the persecution of grey squirrels in this country, the overarching problem. So please, keep an eye on our social media accounts. Again, if you go to www.urbansquirrels.co.uk, that link to our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. There, first of all, we publish petitions or any kind of calls to action. For example, the Royal Parks recently put out a survey, a visitor survey, and we encourage people to fill in the survey saying that they don't like the idea of rural parks killing animals, and squirrels in particular, but other animals as well. So please do keep an eye on our social media accounts in order to kind of not miss any petitions, calls for action. Animal Aid publishes all these things as well. And really, it also helps just to give us a bit of a boost. Even if you just see a picture of a squirrel, just like it, comment, share it, because that means that the way the famous algorithm works, it will be shown to more people, so we can spread more of a positive image of the animal. Obviously, as rescuers, we will always need money. So if you can, again, on our website, there is a shop. In order to fill in the background, I've placed a few things there: Christmas cards, calendars, bags, what have you, mugs. So consider buying something. If you think that we need the money more than, well, I'm not going to name big companies, but if you think we need money more than they do. Also, we've got an Amazon wish list. You can buy some nuts. So Squirrels would be very grateful. The usual, what does every charity want? Donations as well. Thank you for asking.
Brilliant. We have another question from Bryony. She asks, where do the Wildlife Trust stand on this issue?
Oh my goodness. Yes.
That's a big question.
It is, yeah, it's a very sad question, because obviously wildlife trusts are a big charity and, I'm sure they're doing a lot of good work raising awareness of our environment. Unfortunately, they're also killing grey squirrels quite extensively. About 3 years ago, they announced this kind of bizarre plan to recruit 5,000 volunteers whose job would be to trap grey squirrels, transfer them into a bag and hit them on the head. Yeah, so we, it wasn't our, Urban Squirrels and Animal Aid kind of publicized this petition. It must have been about 140,000 people that signed it. And we had meetings with wildlife trusts. It looked like fine. They took EU money for killing grey squirrels, so their hands were in some ways tied. But they're killing lots and lots of squirrels. So I think, if you happen to be a member or even just a member of the public, it would help if you wrote a polite email to them saying, have you considered non-lethal population control? And it's kind of, all the work they do is predicated on exactly the myths I've tried to deal with.
Absolutely. Okay, we have another question from Sarah. Sarah asks, why do you think conservationists have latched onto the idea of culling squirrels, etc.? Do you think it's a lack of knowledge or just wanting to use squirrels as a scapegoat?
Well, it's hard to kind of second guess people's motivation. As I said, there seems to be a kind of almost academic fashion for all things native. And that is literally like any fashion. The pendulum would swing back and forth. Before, we were trying to do acclimatization, and that's why we introduced squirrels. Now we don't like them and we want to kill them. There are grants for that as well. It's kind of following the money will probably lead us somewhere as well. There is a lot of inertia, I suppose, as well. Once something is said, it is very hard to unsay it. Who was it? I think it was St. Augustine said of the truth that, it's like a lion, you let it out and it will do its own work. I'm not quite sure whether I am with St. Augustine on that. It seems that it is public myths that are like a lion going around devouring everything, and confronting that particular not very helpful animal is difficult. I think it's a combination of money and inertia, actually, and intellectual inertia.
Fantastic. We have a question from Paul. Paul asks, do you know if there are many squirrels in Ireland compared to England?
I'm not precisely sure of the situation in Ireland. Obviously, they have grey and red squirrels as well, and they are killing grey squirrels for precisely the same reason, to ostensibly help red squirrels. They pioneered, I believe, the project of introducing pine martens to grey squirrels. Apparently, research has shown, I had a look at the papers that show that the presence of pine martens reduces the population of grey squirrels, and red squirrels therefore thrive. I had two questions in relation to that study. Number one, I'm not sure whether it took into consideration how quickly grey squirrels actually learn. There are quite a few projects that came out of the University of Exeter showing that grey squirrels have amazing cognitive abilities. They can problem solve, they remember the solutions for 2 years, they can solve counterintuitive puzzles, they can go away from the nuts in order to get the nuts later. So just because in the year or 2 years when the study was conducted, they fell prey to pine martens, doesn't mean that they'll continue to do so. They will learn very quickly, much quicker than we perhaps expect. The other slight issue was with the methodology of the studies. It was kind of done by putting sticky tape on feeders to see whose hairs they were, whether red squirrel hairs or gray squirrel's hairs or pine marten hairs. So with pine marten hairs, they seem to be more red and less gray, which I suppose you could conclude that pine martens ate the gray squirrels. You could also, I suppose, conclude that gray squirrels learned to avoid those feeders. So that was maybe, I mean, I don't know. It's just my question. Maybe there's something I don't know about that. But I suppose the overall problem with pine martens is when we introduce a species to solve a single species problem, it kind of has never worked. Pine martens were persecuted because of eating farmers' chicks and things like that. What will they do when they've run out of gray squirrels, or when gray squirrels have learned to avoid them? They will be back to square one. Pine martens coming into conflict with gamekeepers and farmers. That's actually my chief concern about these projects.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, we've got a couple more questions just before we wrap up. And we've had someone ask if the Woodland Trust's position on killing grey squirrels is the same as the Wildlife Trust.
You know, it's just going to be awful, isn't it? Every big organization you name. Unfortunately, yes, the Woodland Trust do kill squirrels, or well, whatever, they hire people. They have not asked volunteers to do so, but their policy is grey squirrel control. Yes, we had an incident just after lockdown in spring when a dog walker saw on Woodland Trust property. They saw some traps and basically a pile of grey squirrel bodies. That's where children could find them, etc. So we'll put that on social media. Woodland Trust comment. They first of all they said, "Oh no, it was just a car accident." Then when we said, "Actually, we have a picture, there's a pile of them," so no, okay, it must be some kind of rogue person. Then it looks like, well, they said that they do cull squirrels. Unfortunately, they seem to have invested in the development of non-lethal control. It's called Gonocon. It's oral contraceptive for squirrels. So I think the Woodland Trust has contributed to that. So they've done some good, but they do kill squirrels, basically. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. So we'll do two more questions.
Yeah.
So Claire asks, what's the law around dogs chasing and killing grey squirrels in parks?
That is an interesting one. There was an article in the Daily Mail fairly recently about that, about dogs chasing and even killing squirrels in central London parks. It seems that, although killing grey squirrels is legal and in fact encouraged, there does seem to be a kind of fence around how you do it. So if you trap a grey squirrel and shoot it, unfortunately, yes, you're acting legally. If you drown the squirrel in the trap, then you are breaking the law. And it seems that allowing your dog to chase and kill squirrels, it hasn't been tried, if you like. No one has been convicted or got a fine for it. But the Royal Parks in London did put up a notice saying, dog owners, please don't control your dogs, don't allow them to chase squirrels. So I think that is an area where the Royal Parks are doing a little bit of good. For grey squirrel. I mean, I'm sure they do a lot of good generally, but they are pretty horrible to grey squirrels.
Yes, sadly. Yeah, so just for our final question, we've covered this a little bit, but just to kind of give everyone a bit of a reminder, what can we do to help grey squirrels?
Grey squirrels have a public relations problem, don't they? We need to improve their image. That is the main thing we need to do, which is why social media is important. For once, it's not just empty clicks or virtue signaling or whatever. If you like, share, comment, just any cute grey squirrel pictures, information, posts, etc., it will help to spread the message. We need to spread the message. We need to kind of expose the myths, I suppose. Well, that's what I've just been trying to do. Although there's myths I've try to outline, we need to expose them for what they are.
Yeah, so sharing this talk is a great way to help them. Sharing it on social media to help discuss some of those myths. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, yeah, we'll kind of wrap up there. I think Tim's going to join us. Oh, yes, here he is.
Thank you.
Natalia, that was really interesting. I've been sitting listening again in the background there.
Thank you.
It's great. I knew I would learn a whole load today when I woke up this morning. I was thinking, do you know what, I'm going to learn all sorts of stuff. And I've slightly fallen for that negative PR, as it were, about grey squirrels, without giving it any thought. I definitely absorbed that bias, So it's a really interesting area that you've been going, and obviously you've got a very thorough expertise on that. So thank you for sharing that. And I noted that we had some really good questions there too. So people are really concerned about this. And I think we do agree that one of the nice things about this whole summit is to put attention not only on wildlife in general, which I think doesn't get enough attention within the broader animal movement, but also particularly to the incredible work that so many activists are doing quietly on their own in their local areas to help preserve where they can and to do some of the important, watching and logging, recording of numbers, and just a whole effort that's going on, quite often unspoken, and therefore, not often thanked. So I think on behalf of all the people who are doing that sort of work, and I know, Jade, with your work in Animal Aid, you're in touch with a broad network of activists, quite quietly working away on doing their very best to, help hedgehogs. I know there's some groups that specifically working with hedgehogs, and I just suppose, if I was a squirrel, if I was a grey squirrel, I'd just be really grateful for your, standing up for squirrels and helping address some of those issues. So I do hope people will, value more and more the work that's going on, and especially with wildlife, with conservation, with preservation. But of course, it's that broader picture that, going plant-based diets is such a massive help across the board. That's one of the reasons I love working with Animal Aid, because you had that wonderful, clear kind of broader picture, but then also can work with some really dedicated, focused campaigns like working with squirrels and other wildlife. So Natalia, thank you very much for joining us. Jade, thank you for once more bringing in a most fantastic guest. We've got one more session of our summit. You can see everything on the vegfest.co.uk website and also on the social media pages right there, but it's all archived for future. So if you're watching this sometime in the future, way beyond November, in another lockdown, 2020,
Hopefully not.
then, do, of course, go to the Urban Squirrels website and to the Animal Aid for further information. And you can see all of these talks archived on vegfest.co.uk. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening. Thank you, people. And we'll see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.